Hey y'all, coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government, brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Ben Kittelson, manager of Telus, and GovLove co-host for you today. We've got a great episode. We're going to be talking about the perceptions and pulse of government workers. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. Engaging Local Government Leaders is a national, volunteer-run, membership-based nonprofit organization with a mission to engage the brightest minds in local government. You can check us out and learn more about our $50 annual membership at elgl.org. And you can also check out the new strategic plan. Now, let me introduce today's guest. Dr. Elizabeth Linos is the professor of public policy and management at the Harvard Kennedy School and faculty director at the People Lab, which she founded in 2017 to collaborate with government agencies to respond to challenges practitioners face. She studies, designs, and tests innovations in how government operates and focuses on the people of government and the services they deliver through her research. With that, Dr. Linos, welcome to GovLove. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you and kind of nerd out about some research you've done. But as you know, because I think you've mentioned you were a GovLove fan, we like to start the lightning round to get to know our guest a little bit. So my first question for you is, what book are you currently reading?
Good question. I actually just finished a book of short stories by Vijay Novak, who's the guy from The Office. Called One More Thing. It's pretty hilarious. So if you have a job that is stressful and you just need a few pages of funny every once in a while, I highly recommend.
Oh, that's awesome. His children's book has become a big hit with my toddler. It's a children's book with no pictures. It just is it makes the reader say some ridiculous things, and that's kind of the shtick. But
it's a great book. That was probably the first book by Vijay Novak that I read. So I've graduated to his adult stuff now.
There you go. Yeah. So I can see it in my future now. Someday I'll get to his adult stuff. All right. Next slide, Eric, question for you. What was the first album that you bought?
It was Jagged Little Pill, the CD, nice. By Alanis Morissette. I thought I was so cool a teenager.
Awesome.
Yeah, because I think it was that, and then I guess Red Hot Chili Peppers was later. Californication was later, but I think Jagged Little Pill was the first one.
Yeah. That's good. That's very cool. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Then next slide, I got a question for you. What's the last great movie or TV show that you watched and would recommend?
So this is similar to my book selection. I'm not particularly sophisticated with my TV watching and movie show watching. But lately, just because the world has been difficult, I've gone back to rewatching things that I've loved and make me feel comfortable. And actually for me, that's things like Scandal. So I like to imagine a world where somebody, just a competent woman is secretly in charge and everything's going to be okay. So I've gone back to the basics. A lot of Parks and Rec as well. I know this audience will appreciate that. So just going back to the basics.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, The West Wing's good for that. Madam Secretary is good for in that same vein of wow, everyone's so competent and
Exactly.
All right, then my last lightning round question for you: where do you go for inspiration?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have a specific kind of place or routine, but I grew up in Greece, and so anytime I'm close to water, whatever that is, like a lake or a beach or just anywhere where I can see water, I feel more relaxed and ready to think. So to me, when I really need to think, that's where I like to go.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. All right. Well, then I always like to ask folks about kind of their career and how they got into the work that they're doing. So for you, what was your path to doing this sort of research on government workers and on efficiencies in government? How'd you kind of end up in this world and end up in kind of the role you're at the Harvard Kennedy School?
Yeah. So I actually started my career as a development economist. So I was, coming up right when randomized control trials were becoming a thing in development economics, and I worked in Bangladesh and other places. And so my kind of early background was how to just do kind of data intensive work on social programs. And that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to work on poverty programs and things like that. And through a series of coincidences and luck, I ended up working for the Greek government where I'm from.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hired like basically as a kid, like, it was when the news were talking about like, Obama's speechwriter is 26 or something like that.
Yeah.
So there was this vibe that you may remember in government where like if we just brought in kind of data kids or innovation kids, we were going to transform government. So I was kind of one of those kids in government in Greece. But what happened at the time, this was, 2009 or so, is we entered government and we found out quite quickly thereafter that the previous government had faked government statistics.
Oh, wow.
And so if you're a data kid, that's really dramatic. And then a few months later, we were under the IMF because the prime minister made the, I think, correct decision to tell the world about it. And that was the beginning of, the huge financial crisis, the Greek financial crisis that ended up becoming kind of more of a global financial crisis that we were at the center of. And it was life-changing for Greece and for Greeks in so many different ways. For me, it was this really shocking moment where we had kind of the smartest people in the world from any country or from Brussels or from the IMF itself, really thinking about public sector reform and saying like how we're going to change government and transform government. And I knew from my previous work, like really smart and thoughtful people who were thinking about how you evaluate programs. And it was super clear that there was not that level of thinking or depth about the people of government. So the public servants that we were asking to make all these changes and to radically transform government while we were, cutting their pensions and while the global community was calling them lazy and bureaucratic. And so, I left that experience after a few years saying, we need to have that level of depth and rigorous analysis on how do we support government workers. And that really changed my research trajectory. I ended up working for the behavioral insights team after and during my PhD. So that brought in the behavioral science of my work. But ultimately, all of this came from this deep held belief that if we don't think about the people of government or the people who are called to make all these innovations, then we're just talking about ideas. We're not implementing any reality. And that's really been central to my work.
Oh yeah, no, that's fascinating, and you're right. Like sometimes there's this breakdown of like, well, and these are all the policy changes or the programs we want to implement, and then often we, at least I'll speak for me and in ELGL and GovLove, is like we'll talk to the individual, but like how are we thinking about how our institutions treat those individuals and what their kind of like experience like could how that impacts the policy and program implementation. I'm just, we don't have to like, you don't have to like sum all of your research up in one sentence, but I'm curious, like, how is that, as you've explored this in more detail, how have you kind of seen the connection between, the experience of the people of government and like policy areas and programs and all the like nuts and bolts of government? Like what's been some of the things you've maybe learned along the way?
Yeah. So, the main thing is kind of what you said, that if we don't care about any part of the implementation questions, then, policy design is not going to be enough. Good ideas are not enough. As I tell my students, a lot of people have good ideas. Like, government isn't in need of your genius idea. It's all about the implementation. Where the rubber hits the road. And so when I set up the People Lab, which is our research team here at the Harvard Kennedy School, I was really trying to think about like what are the elements of kind of functioning public sector. If we say we're going to invest in the institution because we think it matters, because we think that you can't really solve social challenges if you don't have a functioning public sector, what would you invest in? And so that's led to three big buckets of research. One is around the people, hence the title. So we think a lot about how to recruit, retain, and support government workers. And early on, that was work on how to, for example, recruit a more diverse police force, or how to think about bringing in more talent into government. More recently, it's been around retention and burnout, and what does it mean to have workplaces where employees can stay motivated and engaged. Then we have a second bucket of research that's around the nuts and bolts of service delivery. So a lot of that work started with, how do we make it easier for people to interact with their government? How do we streamline kind of the administrative burden of having to access a social safety net program or, take up a new government service? Now we're starting to think about how that then links to questions of trust and trust in government. which are of course getting more and more complicated. But there's a whole bucket of research that is really about how do we make sure that the experience of interacting with government is a positive one. And in my ideal world, those two areas of research are totally connected, right? If we invest in the people of government, then they're able to deliver services more effectively. And then we have a third bucket of research that's a little bit more meta, that is thinking about, why is it that even though we're producing a lot of policy relevant research in the world, oftentimes it's not getting adopted by government. What are the barriers that governments face, the organizational ones, the behavioral ones, and how do we help reduce those barriers so that when we do have some evidence about what works, we can actually think about adoption at scale. So that's thinking about kind of the bigger evidence-based policymaking community and how to make sure that that's more closely linked to what government leaders need to be able to do their work.
Yeah, connecting the academic with the practitioner almost. Is that kind of third bucket?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Where at least in my book, the important part is starting with the practitioner, not with the academic. So what do governments actually need? And what questions are they asking? And how can academia help answer those questions?
Yeah. No, this is really cool. There's lots there I want to follow up on, but we'll link to the public servant project so folks can find out more and learn about some of your research. And we'll talk about some of your research, here today. But so I am curious. You mentioned one of the areas being a focus on the people and like burnout and kind of retention being an area. Like, and I know kind of in prepping for this that you've done, you've published some academic articles on this topic as well. Like, what are some of the things and the reason I picked up on this in particular is like one thing I've noticed in my work, kind of working with local governments all across the country, is like, particularly since COVID, the degree of stress and the degree of burnout is really, I don't know, I've really seen an impact on the workforce. Kind of, if there's a theme for a lot of different organizations in a lot of different places, like that is definitely one of them. Is folks feeling burned out and feeling kind of disconnected from that from their work and leaving, and it's a big challenge. So I'm curious, kind of the research you've done in that bucket on burnout and retention. Like what are some of the things you've found and some of the like even solutions maybe that are out there?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. This is probably one of the most critical components of what it means to improve the government workforce more broadly, or to strengthen the government workforce, is figuring out how do we support people with compassion fatigue or burnout that, even before COVID was an issue. It's just COVID really exacerbated that in ways that I think we all experienced. And remember, we ask our government leaders or our public servants to do things that we think the private sector can't do. So like at a really fundamental level, the nature of the work of a public servant is oftentimes so emotionally demanding or physically demanding or cognitively demanding that it's no wonder that we see really high levels of burnout in that space. So, there's a couple things that we've learned along the way. One is, and this links directly to the question of retention. One is that there's a lot that can be done at the level of a specific agency and department that oftentimes gets overlooked. So, when I'm talking to some of our government partners or to, policymakers, and they're worried about retention, the main thing that always comes up is salary, right? People will say things like, well, so-and-so is paying more, like the police department next door is paying more, or we can't compete with the tech sector, or, we can't raise salaries enough. And of course, money really matters, right? In terms of, who you can recruit and retain. But it became really clear during COVID and afterwards that people who had the same type of job and the same salary and the same increase in job demands were experiencing very different levels of burnout. And what we found in our research is one of the strongest predictors of whether or not you actually get burnt out, like clinically burnt out, is whether or not you have someone at work that you can talk to about your day-to-day work. So, imagine you're working for an employment agency or unemployment insurance. Everybody's workload tripled overnight during COVID. But not everyone experienced that as clinical levels of burnout. It turns out that the level of social connection that you have at work, or your sense of being understood or feeling valued both by your peers and by your supervisor, operate as a buffer against burnout. So the work is getting hard, but you don't experience it as kind of being your fault or being something that's wrong with you. It's just the nature of the work. So we've done some work now to try to figure out, how do you connect otherwise unconnected individuals, right? So it's all well and good to say, like, if you have a best friend at work, you're more likely to stay. That's true. Yeah. But how do you create best friends at work, right? So we've done some work with the Behavioral Insights team as well that shows that you can nudge people or encourage people to share experiences and advice with each other. Mm-hmm. And even if that's anonymous, and even if it's online and asynchronous, so like super light touch, as long as you're giving people the opportunity to share experiences, and every week you're sharing somebody else's story, so people feel like, even if I'm not participating, I'm hearing every week that other people are going through what I'm going through. That process not only reduces burnout quite dramatically, it also cut resignations by more than half in some cases, or increased job satisfaction in other cases. Yeah. So really dramatic effects for something that's relatively light touch. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it. Like, all of us have been in jobs where we've been underpaid, or, it's been really hard, or the work has been, undervalued by society, but we stay because we love our teammates, or we, believe in our boss, or we think the work is really meaningful. Like, all those other factors really matter, not only for who stays and who goes, but also their kind of ability to cope with difficult job demands.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I was going to say it's culture. Yeah. It's kind of, I would almost sum it up as like, how are you building that culture where folks can connect and talk through things and, not feel isolated or just, I don't know, disconnected from their work. Yeah. That's really cool that's coming out in the research.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, really grounded in a broader literature and psychology that we've seen in academic settings and in schools. And the basic idea is, bad things are going to happen. You're going to get a bad grade at school, or you're going to have a really difficult, emotionally demanding client. The thing that then leads to worse mental health outcomes is feeling like that's your fault, or that you're alone in this, or that you can't do the job well, and that's why you're having this difficulty. And social connection, or building the sense that we're all in this together, or that we're going through this together, allows you to really separate out your own sense of self-worth from the difficulty of the work. So yes, it's hard, but it's not that you are bad at your job if it's hard for you. It's just hard. And that ends up making a big difference for people.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. And so you said one of the interventions was like creating, space, even if it's anonymous or asynchronous. Is that like, I don't know, like if I'm a director that wants to like take a lesson away and try to do something with my team, is that sort of like just like a, I don't know, anonymous message board? Is it like kind of a weekly email where you're getting maybe, I don't know, anonymous submissions to it? Or like, how does that kind of like practically kind of look?
Yeah. So we've tried a few different versions, and I would say if you were, leading a team or the head of an agency, the main advice I would give as a professor is you should test it and see what works. Yeah. But what we find is, some sort of light touch way that you get nudged every week to read other people's stories, or encouraged to share your story in an anonymous form has been successful. We've tried it with 911 dispatchers. We've done something similar with correctional officers. Two things that, always get asked when I share these results. One is, do you need a message board where people can respond in real time to each other? We haven't tested that, but you could imagine a world where that would be even more interactive and more successful. Like, a lot of Facebook groups are organized that way, but we don't know. The second is, well, what if the job actually sucks? Like, what if it's actually really difficult? Like, this is supposed to be a well-being intervention. People aren't going to say like happy and nice things about how great the work is. So we have tested that somewhat accidentally. We just ask people to share experiences and advice. And we find that even when what they're saying isn't always positive, when they're saying, this is really hard, or actually the work, is terrible, or whatever the case may be, you still see improvements in job satisfaction just because people can share. So it's not like you can hide behind not talking about it and just imagine that people are coping. There's some value, even if it's to vent, of sharing experiences. But again, we've done a few studies in this space. No one should ever trust any one study. This is an area I think that we need to explore further. And there's the flip side of that, which, you mentioned Public Servant Project, which is a big initiative that we're starting now. which is there actually hasn't been a national collection of how employees are doing in government, especially in state and local government.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're trying to think about new ways of elevating what's happening across the country. And one of those projects is just the equivalent of a people survey or an engagement survey that is asking people to share how they're doing on burnout, how they're doing on employee engagement and job satisfaction. So we can kind of elevate the voices of public servants as a whole at the state and local level. And use that as a starting point to say, like, this is what people are experiencing around you. You're not alone if you're feeling, some kind of way about your work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was a perfect transition. You don't even need me here to host. That was, but yeah, so the public servant project, I mean, that to be revealed to our audience, like that was why I wanted to talk to you. It was about this work that you guys have going on in the survey that's out right now. So maybe, can you talk a little bit more, like first, like we'll link to it in the show notes, but there's a survey open right now that folks can and should respond to if you work in the public sector. So like who should take it? Like what's the data you're hoping to collect? Like how long is the survey? What are the kind of different areas you're hoping to kind of get data on? Is it just burnout, or are there other components you're looking for too?
Great. I'm glad you asked, Ben. So we're doing this national survey, as I mentioned, called Public Servant Pulse, which is essentially trying to get at the type of questions that people ask in a typical employee engagement survey or people survey, as well as some additional questions. And I'll share a little bit more about what that means. But the basic idea behind the survey was, we'd work with an individual government agency or a department, and we'd say, hey, we did some surveying of your workforce, and let's say, 30% of your workers are burnt out. Yeah. The immediate next question was, okay, is that a lot or a little? Like, how do I compare to my peers? How do I compare to other people in the same occupation? How do I compare to other public servants in the same city? And there wasn't really a national benchmark for what public servants are facing at the state and local level. And so one way to think about this is that we're trying to collect that national benchmark that we're hoping would be useful for any government leader who cares about kind of employee engagement of their employees. So we ask the same kinds of questions that you would want us to ask around job satisfaction, around burnout, around whether or not they have a good experience with their supervisor, whether or not they feel heard or understood, as well as some more controversial questions like whether or not they've experienced harassment, how they feel about the levels of red tape or administrative burden in their workplace. And the idea there is to really try to collect information that an agency can use to make improvements. So it's not just the typical, like, are you going to quit your job, which of course we have, but also, how are you experiencing the residents that you interact with, or, what's happening at work that brings you joy or keeps you there. So kind of more open-ended questions as well. For those listeners who have heard of the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, the FEVS, this is kind of the equivalent of that, plus some extras for state and local government. When we started this project, we were like, oh, this is like a FEVS, but for state and local, because we don't have data collection at the state and local level. Since we've started, the Trump administration has canceled the FEVS. So now there isn't any effort of this scale and scope, both at the state and local level or at any level. Luckily, the Partnership for Public Service has been trying to do the equivalent work for federal employees, and we're doing some of this work for state and local employees. But the idea is to kind of rebuild just an understanding of how public servants are doing. And so I'm sure you'll link to it. We have a broader website called publicservantproject.hks.harvard.edu, worst URL ever, that gives you a little bit more details. But we're really encouraging anyone who works for state and local government in any position at all levels to take the survey. And we're really excited that we already have, participants from all states, as well as Washington, D.C. We have hundreds of cities represented, but the more people we get to take this survey, the more useful it's going to be. So if we have more people from a specific region, we can break down the data for that region. Or if we have more, specific types of occupations, whether it's firefighters or social workers or teachers or whatever the case may be, then we can do analysis at that level. So we're really encouraging people throughout the month of July to take the survey and share their voice. Very
cool. Yeah. And so it's open through July 31st. Is that kind of the deadline for folks listening at home?
That's when we would like people to take it. It may or may not be open for a few more days after that, but my
Yeah.
goal is to get everyone to take it in July.
Yeah, depends how close to the numbers that you want to be at are. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Although we're doing well so far, thank goodness.
That's great. Okay, so yeah, well, for listeners, the link will be in the show notes. It'll also be on the ELGO website, and Dr. Linos also rattled it off very quickly. So hopefully you guys caught that.
So, publicservantproject.hks.harvard.edu.
Oh, yeah, that was great. Well, I am curious, so like, what are you mentioned like all this, like the things you're hoping to get, like I assume there will be kind of like a series of reports, or like how long, so from when survey closes to, hey, that we've got some things that we're going to start sharing publicly. Like, what do you think that turnaround time will be?
Yeah, we're really going to push hard to have results by the fall. So
Cool.
The reason I want people to take this now is so that by the early fall, you can go back to that same website and play around with the data yourself. You can see like how things are shaping up for different types of public servants, for different questions, for different regions. And so we're going to make that available as a public good.
Yeah.
Because as I mentioned, one of the main goals for all of this work is for, any government leader, whether they're a chief people officer or whether they're just a manager of a team, and, people strategy is not part of their official job description. We want them to be able to go see, like, is what I'm experiencing normal? Where are there kind of nuggets of success stories across the country, or where can I look to for examples of what's working? And we're trying to build a hub for all of that on this website so that people can turn to that when they want data, but also when they want inspiration for what they should be doing in their own governments.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. And as you were describing it initially, I was struck by, like, you're right that, like, I've been in organizations that do those kind of employee surveys. I've been on the consultant side, the people that come in and collect the survey data to then analyze it for an organization. And there's not like a national comparison. It's like, at best, maybe if you do it over a couple of years, you can compare it to past, instances where the city's done this or the organization's done this, or you can compare a department versus the organization as a whole. But like having like, are we as an organization an outlier, or is this normal, is probably a good gut check for a lot of these places that are like, do you have a good culture? Are your employees engaged, or are they burned out? And like, having a sense of scale for that is, I would imagine that's pretty valuable.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that's our goal. And, we have the privilege and the benefit as an academic team of also elevating issues that might be really well known to the ELGL community, but might not be widely known for the American public. So people are surprised to hear that a lot of public servants experience attacks at work. It's not just the professions that we're used to hearing about, but if you're a librarian or if you're a bus operator, you might be experiencing a whole new set of demands on your work and on your time, and a level of responsibility that wasn't the case 20 years ago. Or you might be experiencing frustration from residents in a way that people don't really fully grasp. And so we're hoping to also elevate some of the issues that are going to be obvious to the public servants taking the survey, but it's helpful to see kind of on aggregate the scale of both the problems and the opportunities for state and local government employees.
Yeah, having data behind it rather than just an anecdote or a one-off kind of story. Yeah. Oh, very cool. Well, cool. Well, I hope everyone listening goes to check that out, fills out the survey, and then we'll stay tuned for some of the results. And another, as I was prepping for our conversation, maybe this is a nice tie into what we could expect when the public servant pulse is done. But you also released a white paper on some results on like how Americans view government workers, in June. And this seems like it was also based on some data collection, but maybe I'm making that assumption. But can you talk about some of the findings from that, and at a high level? And then I'm curious about some of the, as you cut through the crosstabs, what some of that looks like. But and maybe it's not fair that I'm calling this as like a similar sort of report that might come out of the public servant pulse. But I thought this was a interesting report and findings for folks to check out.
Yeah, it's very fair. And you're absolutely right. It was based on data that we collected earlier in the summer. We're actually doing a series of quarterly pulses on how the American public views government workers,
Cool.
starting last December, and I think we've done 2 rounds. The third one is just finishing up now. And the idea is to essentially do a pulse check on how people's opinions about government workers are changing, or how they break down, as you mentioned, by group. And it is very fair that you'll see something similar in the fall with our new data collection. But basically, what we're showing so far in this data is just how a kind of nationally representative sample of Americans views government workers more broadly. And there's good news and bad news. On the positive side, the majority of Americans still hold pretty favorable views of public sector workers. So we measure their perceptions of public servant warmth, competence, integrity, and innovation. And except for innovation, which, as you know, is a negative stereotype against public servants, for warmth, competence, and integrity, the majority of Americans, more than 50%, still hold favorable views. The challenge, well, there are many challenges. One of the challenges is that they still hold more favorable views of the private sector than the public sector. So, this is especially clear on innovation, but even for some of the other categories, we still see Americans having kind of less favorable views of a public sector worker compared to their private sector counterpart on things like competence. The other thing we've started to look at, which I think is potentially more interesting, is how this breaks down by profession, right? So we're starting to see a lot of political polarization for different types of public servants. So we measure kind of the different beliefs of Democrats versus Republicans, so self-reported Democrats versus self-reported Republicans. Some of the things you might expect. So in general, Democrats view public sector workers more favorably, although the difference on innovation is smaller than you might expect.
Interesting.
But then when you look at individual types of government workers, we start to see some kind of interesting patterns. So just to oversimplify the white paper, people, the nerds should go read it if they want to, fellow nerds. But, everybody loves firefighters, Democrats, Republicans, independents, they all view firefighters favorably. But then if you ask about election officials, Democrats are much more likely to see election officials as competent or having high integrity compared to their Republican counterparts. And then that flips for ICE agents, for example, where Democrats view ICE agents as significantly, less competent and less warm or less honest. And so you see a lot of variation by party and by specific occupation. The other thing we saw, which is more on the behavioral science side, is that it really matters what you call this group of people. So if you call them public servants, people like them more. If you call them bureaucrats, people like them less. And I think this, I'm sure you've seen this in the news play out in a myriad of different ways. But when people want to say negative things about government workers, they'll call them bureaucrats. And that's really fed into the national psyche. What was really surprising to me is that if you call this group of people bureaucrats and you ask Americans to imagine, who are you imagining in your head when you're imagining a bureaucrat? They're more likely to imagine someone of the opposite political party than a public servant. So Democrats are imagining Republicans and Republicans are imagining Democrats if you call them a bureaucrat. And that's not true if you call them public servants. So there's just a lot of really interesting politically heavy changes happening to how we talk about public servants, how we think about their competence and warmth and integrity. I think my biases on these are probably clear. I think that we have to do a lot of work to make sure that people understand how hard it is to work in government, and how if they're seeing a government performance be less than what they would like, chances are it's about organizational levers and not about the individual competence of individual people in government. But we have a lot of work to do to really think about how we change these stereotypes about government workers, because it affects everything. It affects how we see government. It also affects who's going to be likely to want a job in government in the future. It's going to affect whether or not we invest in social spending. So there are a lot of implications of these stereotypes that we're going to need to work on in the next few years.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And, and I think it's interesting that you're able to tease out different roles because I would imagine, when I talk to the people that aren't in the the local government world or even interested in government or politics, even like they think of government as kind of like one amorphous blob, and there's not like this distinction between different levels, but you know splitting out the police officer, firefighter, librarian, like that's a way to do it. Are there other kind of like are you able to tease out the different levels, or is it just kind of through those roles that you're able to get the different perspectives? Or I don't know how you guys thought about that. Like, for some people, like government just, just capital G government over there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we've done a couple things already, and then I'll tell you what we're working on now. So you're absolutely right. Most of the research, not just ours, but in general, most of the research suggests that people don't really differentiate not only between levels of government, but also between career civil servants and politicians, right? So when people say government, they're just imagining politicians sometimes. So there's a lot of hard work to be done to kind of share the message that actually government is, the person who picks up your trash, or the librarian who is running a program in your local library, or is someone who is making sure you're safe. And safety could mean public safety in the traditional sense. It also means making sure your water is safe and your roads are safe. So, all of these are government. They just happen at different levels and with different levels of political appointees versus career civil servants. Mm-hmm. So one thing we can do is get to that level of specificity. And it's certainly true that for some occupations, the more specific you get, the more favorable people are, which is a good sign. The other thing we're thinking about now is how do you kind of shift some of these negative perceptions? And we're testing different approaches to that using what we know from behavioral science. So this could be, a reflection exercise, asking people to think about what government does for them every day. It could be sharing the stories of public servants. Many people in the audience will have heard of like Humans of Public Service, HOPS, or other efforts to kind of share the story of people of government, which I think are really excellent efforts to humanize the people who work in government. So we're testing out different approaches to helping people reflect on what this actually means. More results to come soon, but I think this is going to be a long-term and difficult project because, as you know, there's a countervailing force, right, in the media and in politics that is strategically calling government workers corrupt or lazy or incompetent. And so we're fighting this uphill battle. But as I mentioned, when we started this conversation, this isn't the first time this has happened. This has been happening in the US since at least Reagan. It happened in Greece during the Greek financial crisis. It's like a common narrative against the people who work in government that we need to document and understand how it's changing, but we also need to try and potentially shift.
Yeah. Well said. And I think it's also a part of our history that like we've professionalized government and made it, more, less partisan and less polarized, especially at the local level. And so like, celebrating that history and like trying to like go back to it, I think is also, part of this too, right? You talk about some of that, that story that like, Robert Moses, in addition to all the things he did, also did a lot of work on the professional administrative state in New York with like there's a lot of things like that like people just aren't aware of, that like these are nonpartisan positions that that make your cities and counties and states run.
Absolutely. I feel like I've mentioned the Pendleton Act more times in the past 2 years than the rest of my life put together. But you know what? We're working on it.
I love that. Well, and before we start kind of wrapping up, I do want to go back to your buckets of research, and one of them was around sort of this connecting academics with practitioners, and I'm just curious about how do you think about that? How do you make those connections, like, and make sure that the research is actually what people need and what organizations can use? Like, what does that look like for you and the team at the People Lab? Like, how do you guys think through that and engage with practitioners?
Yeah, great question. So the kind of founding principle of the People Lab is that academia needs to be more useful to government, or else why should people pay our salaries? Truthfully, like there's really no point. And so what that means in practice is that we try to start with questions that a government has asked and use the resources of an academic institution and our team and, all the nerds that we work with to try to help answer those questions. So, one primary kind of point in this model is that the government gets to decide the question and we're there to support answering that question. Traditionally, that has been kind of a one-to-one research practitioner partnership. So we'll work with an individual city government or with a state agency, and we'll say, okay, what challenges are you working on? Do they fit into one of these buckets? And then we'll work together to both understand the nature of the problem and then co-design a solution that we can then pilot and test and see if it works. So that's been the traditional model, which I think is a good one. Mm-hmm. And, we're always looking for more partners who are excited about doing data-driven work or evidence-based work. So they should feel free to call me if anybody wants to do that kind of work. But as we do more of that work, we realized that, there's only so much you can do at scale if you're going one project or one agency at a time. So now we're starting to think about what it means to take this to scale. And one of the things we're starting to play with, and I'm really proud of us, Ben, that we've gotten to this point in the conversation and haven't yet mentioned AI. So I apologize, and we'll mention AI now. We're starting to think about what would it mean to take some of that insight that comes from like calling an academic and saying, hey, what do we know about this and what works and how would I implement that, and use an AI enhanced tool to provide both kind of the assistance of telling a government leader, like, here's what the evidence says, but also kind of the coach function of like, I know you think you want to do this thing because you heard about it in the news, but actually that wasn't a good study. Or I know you're only looking to your neighbor, but did you know that there was this cool city somewhere else that was doing a really interesting project that you could learn from? So we're trying to build this AI tool called PolicyBot that will take kind of the curated evidence base about what works, and we're going to test different ways of presenting that to government leaders to figure out what's most useful to them, right? So what's the right format? What's the right level of detail? How do we make sure that that's actually usable to make decisions? And there's parts of that are on the testing side that we're doing now. There's other parts that really require changing academia. So we did some work where we did a bunch of studies to essentially ask policymakers, like, what kind of information do you need from the evidence base to know if this is going to be useful for you? And the kinds of things that people told us are things that wouldn't be surprising to you, Ben. So I need to know about the cost of the program. I need to know about if it's been, tested in a place that looks like mine. I need to know about the political context of how it was run. I need to know about whether or not I need a separate budget for it, like really practical implementation questions. Well, it turns out those details are never in academic papers. They're not even in policy briefs or government-oriented white papers. And so some of the work that we're doing now is to document that mismatch and see if we can push academia to focus more on those details so that the research that comes out of academic institutions is at least useful and usable. And then it's on us as a community to figure out how it will be used.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, interesting. That's a big change, I would imagine, for an institution that's used to doing research.
It may take us a decade, but we can do hard things.
Yeah, exactly. We can do hard things. Well, I would imagine one of the challenges also is the pace of, and maybe I shouldn't assume, but is the pace a challenge too? Of like, hey, I need to know this in order to make a decision in the government context for a budget process that's starting in the spring. But like, I don't know what the pace of academic research is. From the outside, it seems like it's not maybe quite that fast. But so is that another challenge too? Of like, how do we make sure we can align with like the political and institutional needs of government in a way that maybe our processes on the research side haven't traditionally?
Yeah, you're totally right. When I was in government, I used to think academics were so useless because they were too slow. We'd be like, oh, we have this huge unemployment crisis. And we talk to an academic and they'd be like, great, give me 6 months to do a literature review. And I was like, that's too late. Like, what are you talking about? And then on the flip side, I now talk to people outside of government who are like, oh, I'm so innovative, but government is too slow for my innovations. And so both sides see this as a timing challenge.
Yeah.
My sense is that both sides are somewhat right. So what I try to tell our non-government friends is it's not about slow or fast in government. It's about timing, right? So like what you can get past during budget season is going to be different than what you can get past, at the beginning of a new administration versus what you can do elsewhere. So it's a lot about understanding the ebbs and flows of government timing. On the government side, to my government friends, I say, yes, you're right. Some academics are really slow, but the insights that we're trying to build out now don't have to be slow. So randomized control trials got a bad rap because they used to take 5 years and $1 million.
Yeah.
Now we're really implementing the rollout of a really rigorous evaluation alongside the rollout of a program. So if you're testing, how should we attract more people to enter a police force, you're going to know the results of that the day applications close, not 6 months later. So it's really about working with an academic team that thinks quickly or thinks in government, both in terms of timing and in terms of practice, to say, how do we build in rigorous evaluation and data collection into the day-to-day work of government, and not to think of research as like something separate that takes too long and only gives us insight when we don't need them, which to be fair is how research traditionally has been done. There's a whole generation of people both in government and in academia that are trying to break that mold, and I think we're making some progress on that front.
Oh, no, I love that. Yeah. Building in a way to test your assumptions and test things into the day-to-day work like that. But I'm so is there an example you could share where that kind of, where that's worked or where you've seen that be successful for a government organization that when they're rolling out a new program, this is how they've built in some sort of test that they can then use to evaluate the program later on?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of this for us did start in recruitment, right? So if you're going to be putting out job ads, you might as well put out 2, right? And see which one works. And you're learning, on the day, what's working and what's not working. We do a lot of work, for example, on take up of social programs. During COVID, there was this incredible urgency to get the child tax credit out to people that were newly eligible, or rental assistance out to people who were at risk of losing their homes. We worked with a lot of governments who, as part of their outreach, built in testing so that we could learn what works as part of the government outreach process. It wasn't a separate thing. And you can learn from that process in ways that you can then scale up quickly. So for example, in our work on rental assistance, we did some work with Denver and with Austin. We learned that the language that you would put in an outreach effort really made a difference, not only in terms of the number of people who were applying for rental assistance, but also who was applying. And so we learned that by rolling out a mass outreach campaign that was going to happen anyway as part of this effort. But then that insight can be used for all sorts of other programs about how we should talk about the social safety net, or how should we talk about housing so that more people are willing to engage. So it's certainly possible. It does require someone in government knowing when to ask about evaluation or when to ask for help on evaluation, because, people who work in government have a day job, and their day job is not to worry about these things. But there are a lot of people in academia who their day job is to think about these things and want to be useful for free. And so it's really about getting that timing right so that the academic can be useful at the point of rollout and not later.
Yeah. Not evaluating it after the fact.
Yeah, exactly.
But I also think the other thing is it's not the traditional, blind, double blind of, test technique. It's a, hey, we're going to do this. Cause I think one of the, I don't know if it's drilled into you in grad school or just some sort of a vibe you just get is also don't want to have an A/B test group and feel like, some segment of the community that was randomly assigned B isn't getting the same level of service that A did, because of an academic, research setup. But what you're saying is more hey, we're rather than, just doing it one way, why don't we try 2 ways and see which one works better as we're doing rollout, and then we can change our tactics on the fly as we get those results.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's also part of kind of the new generation of what it means to do rigorous research that has social impact is there are ethical considerations that are real and that a good academic would think about, which is you're not going to not give people housing assistance for the purposes of a study. Right. But you might say, if you have, not enough budget to serve everyone, how do we think about service? Do we think about it from a first come, first serve basis? Do we think about it with a lottery? That's research right there. Or as you mentioned, if we're going to do a big outreach campaign anyway, testing which version of the postcard to send doesn't reduce service for anyone. It just helps us learn what works best when we don't know the answer already. So it's really about the nuance of what it means to learn while doing, or testing, learning, and adapting while doing. as opposed to thinking about this as kind of the old school RCTs we learn about in grad school.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, very cool. Well, this has been a fun conversation, and we'll have to have you back in a few months when some of the public's polls results are out. But what else besides that, and we'll, again, for our listeners, we'll link to the survey in the show notes so you can take it and share it with your friends and colleagues. What else are you working on that our listeners ought to look out for? What else is kind of next on your radar?
Yeah. So definitely these surveys and trying to understand more about, how we kind of shift stereotypes about public servants, but also elevating the voice of public servants is going to be top of my list for the next few months. We're also doing a bunch of projects now that kind of dig more deeply into work on housing assistance. So thinking about, if you do have a limited budget as a housing authority, which program works best for whom, right? So if you have rental assistance that you can provide, what's the right way of prioritizing households so that people can actually avoid eviction or homeless shelters? And it's not an obvious answer, right? Sometimes the neediest households, or the households that are the most vulnerable, are going to need a lot more case management and support than what, a typical rental assistance program can provide. So it's kind of a complicated question about which program to give to which type of person. So we're working on that. And as I mentioned, we're thinking a lot about what it means to take these things to scale. So we'll be doing a lot of tests of PolicyBot and AI enhanced tools for policymakers in the next few months. All of those are going to be on the horizon in the next few months.
Awesome. Well, cool. We'll stay tuned. And then always the hardest question: if you could be the GovLove DJ, what song would you pick as the exit music for this episode?
Great question. I have, depending on the day of the week or the time of the day, I would have a different answer to this question. But right now, top of mind for me is that my 8-year-old just finished School of Rock summer camp.
Nice.
As a bassist, which she was not 4 days ago. She is now a bassist, self-identified. And she's been working on Seven Nation Army by the White Stripes. And I think that's a really good song to use as exit music. So that's top of mind for me.
Perfect. Well, that's great. I love that. We'll get that queued up.
She'll be thrilled.
Yeah, that's great. With that, Dr. Linos, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me. That ends our episode for today. I really appreciate you coming on to share what's the work going on at the People Lab and all this cool research that you guys are working on. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And for our listeners, GovLove is brought to you by engaging local government leaders. And the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. You can reach us online at elgl.org/GovLove or at our page on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.